thing to us overseas. We wanted to have hands-on with aircraft. And if we couldn't fly it, we would at least fly in it. That's the main fly in is. We wanted to be in control of it. Colonel Bill Davis, Dr. Eugene Richardson will tell you about Colonel Bill Davis a little time. He was our commanding officer, took us overseas, in 332nd Fighting Group. He respected us as such without rank. Didn't know what rank we were once we got overseas. He signed off to take my aircraft up, and if I decided that it was not going to fly, it was not going to fly that day. And if I decided that, B.O. we called him, I call him that to his face, was going to fly that plane, he would sign it and fly it. And he did that many times. I'm going to, while they're setting up here, a little, I don't know if we have room to set up all of this displays, but we're going to set up as many as we can so that you can see what happened down in Tuskegee and happened in Tuskegee, Alabama, and what happened with us, the rest of us overseas. I actually had a chance to go to Tuskegee, but where was I at the time? I had passed all the mental and physical. I had 20/20 vision at the time, and I did have. I almost make it out now. But I had to have that in order to pass the examination that these guys passed, and I did pass that. But I had taken the physical at Detroit, Michigan, and they had me jumping up and down. I had what they call a murmur. I still have that murmur, heart murmur. Who has a heart murmur? Nobody? There's a heart murmur. And when the doctor checked me last month, I said, it's still there. He said, still there. That heart murmur is there. I thought that thing was going to turn me down in Detroit. I passed it. The mental, some claim that we couldn't pass those mental. I just finished high school in Georgia. I was from a place called Osceola, Georgia at the time. And and are you ready? Well, anyway, I had just passed that. Just graduated from high school, and I tried to get into the United States Army Air Corps, and they wouldn't permit me to go into the United States Army Air Corps. They said, we have no place for Negroes. That's what they said in 1941. And so I decided I was going to get out of this country somehow and, leave. And some woman, the white woman, this little town, I remember she got me into NYA. Anybody remember what NYA, National Youth Administration? We had the WPA, the NYA, all those things. Well, she got me into the NYA, and I was on my way out of this country, and I got it for a New Jersey, and they drafted me back into the United States segregated United States Army. I was fortunate. And I went to Fort Dix. They picked us out and sent us to certain parts of the United States Army, and I drew the United States Army Air Corps. So, now I'm going to probably end up with these guys. At that time, this was in 1942, they had, Bill Davis and others had gotten the opportunity to start flying. I said, well, I'm going to end up with them if I can. So I began taking all the tests, and I was sent to a Labor Battalion in Butlerfield, Colorado. You know what they put the black guys, they didn't know what they had to do with them, no matter how much education you had. They sent you to an aviation squadron. And I went to the 86th Aviation Squadron in Butlerfield, Colorado. I said, well, I'm going to see what can I do to get out. Because all they had me do, and they gave me a stick with a needle on the end of it, and I'd go up to the base commander's office as a member of a squad, and I'd pick up paper every day. And this is all I had, This just didn't seem right. So I took all the tests, and these guys, all of our officers watched, in Butlerfield, the 86th Aviation Squadron, and they said, we're going to see what can we do to. They were very helpful. That's all I can say. And they gave us the opportunity to take every test that came along. White guys could take the test and out of high school and go on into flying. But I finished high school valedictorian in this little class in Osceola, Georgia. Valedictorian, I knew physics, I knew almost burning up this chemistry lab. When I was senior. But anyway, I'm going to take these tests in and see what can I do to get out of this labor battalion. I took the test, I passed them, I passed 94. Oh boy, we have no place for you yet. We have no class for you. That's where Tuskegee, that's the only place in the United States where black people could take flying. These guys here, that's where they went. I'm going to get with them somehow. So I took that, I had taken the test and passed it, and then I waited for my physical. No physical coming. Why? Because there's no class available. At Tuskegee, the only place in the United States. And no class available, what I do, they gave me another test. I had the opportunity to practice take another test. You know, these guys, as I said, the commanding officer was very amiable. He says, this test is for aircraft mechanic. I took that test in 1943, and 1942. He said 1942, and I passed it. And of course, in January 1940, it was a pass-fail test, the same test. It was the same test. I had no trigonometry, at least as high as trigonometry. I took that test. About 10 of us from Buckville, Colorado, from the 86th Aviation Squadron, went to Lincoln Air Force Technical Training School in Lincoln, Nebraska. And guess what? After 6 months, we formed, there was 250 of us, as I recall, from across the United States. We formed, they sent us to Detroit, Sellersfield, Michigan, and we met the Tuskegee Airmen pilots coming up from Tuskegee. And we formed, we had finished aircraft mechanic and aircraft armament and all of those into this electrician. We formed the ground crew of the 332nd Fighter Group. And Dr. Richardson will touch on that. And I've got to end because I don't know how long you've been sitting here. And 1 hour. Well, you know, I better stop now. But anyway, I joined the 332nd Fighter Group there. We went overseas. I'm going to stop. We went overseas. Went overseas. And I'm going to leave it there because, you know, overseas, Bill Davis did give me the opportunity. There was 2 of us. Me and a guy named L. Bill Smith. I don't know where he is now. I saw this guy, Luther Smith, here after 20 years. 50 years. I walked with him and saw him, and I was shocked to see him. But me, L. Bill Smith, I don't know what happened to him. But overseas, Bill Davis did permit us to come back and go to Tuskegee, and we refused at the time because of his status and because of my status. Have you set up Dr. Richardson? Yes. Yes, I'm going to leave this to Dr. Richardson because he's like a walking encyclopedia. You'll find out. And Dr. Richardson.
First of all, Henry, you have to work on you're a little bit too distant. You know, you've got to work on that confidence. Yeah. You're in for a treat tonight. First of all, I'm so proud to be part of the organization. I'm kind of the whatever Bill Jackson calls me. And we've had great speakers. These fellows, I've known them for a while, and their war was a different war. It was a different war. People often ask me, hey, you know, why are you so interested in World War II? You know, you like the planes, the technology, the this, the that. And I say, you know, something was a revolution in all areas. Technology, in terms of geopolitical things, ramifications, and whatever. But you know, the social elements were the interesting things. People trying to wipe other people off the map, and even my own home. You know, just the things that you experience as kids, and we all go through, and whatever. And it was a social revolution at the same time, in which Americans didn't have the respect for other Americans, and the people at the edge, that cutting edge, were these guys. And I often ask myself, what would I do if I was out there and my kid couldn't go here or go there or get into school, or I couldn't use the base cinema or whatever? And I definitely would have been violent. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But what these gentlemen displayed was a certain courage and a certain elegance that makes me often just stop and just say, wow, the things that we've overcome and changed as Americans who fought that war, all of you out there who sacrificed and ultimately overcame an extremely sinister regime or regimes around the world. And at the same time, we fought things here in this country. And these are the guys. So here, you want to hear them. I have deep respect for these four gentlemen. I just wanted to say, a couple of years ago at the Reading World War II weekend, we had them speak, and I think Jefferson was there, and the A-Train, and a bunch of guys that kind of heroes and stuff. And they said, well, we've spoken enough. And the people, it was 400, 500 people, and they were just, no, more. And we just had a bite to eat, and people coming up, and it was like, sign this, and thank you. Thank you. It's a better place to live. It makes more sense. People get along and whatever. We got a long way to go and stuff like that. But these guys were at the cutting edge of all of that. So I'm going to turn it over to them. I don't know how you guys want to work it. I'm going to walk off. And I know Henry, everybody, we're all getting older, and we're looking back in retrospective, kind of philosophical leaning, but this is really a treat. And I'm going to turn it over to them and shut up. But thanks for coming out, and the Tuskegee Airmen, Philadelphia chapter. I just want to introduce, too, the gentleman, Henry Moore. Henry Moore is... and a physicist. We have John Harrison. John L. We have Gene Richardson. And Gene was saying that, told a little story that as part of the Band of Brothers series that was out, everybody went over on a 777 to go to France, Dick Winters included, right? And Gene was on the aircraft, American Airlines, captained by his son, who flew it. Yeah, so quite proud of that. And then finally, we have Luther Smith, who Luther was the real deal and actually got shot down and suffered some wounds in Austria. You shut up. No. Suffered some wounds in Austria and prisoner of war, and will tell us about his exploits. But these are the gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming. And it's however you guys want to run it. Henry, I don't know. We give it to Dr. Richardson.
Hi, good evening. Well, you've been introduced, so I'll just try to. I like to give the historical background for Tuskegee Airmen. And I mentioned something that people don't like to talk about. This whole thing is based on slavery. People do not like to talk about slavery. But this country is based, the development of this country was based on slavery. And a whole lot that has happened in this country, and a lot that goes on, continues to occur in this country, is the result of slavery. And we have to recognize that in order to understand what's going on today, in order to understand what has happened in the past. Since black people were supposedly inferior people, and they're enslaved, in order to keep a person enslaved, you have to keep them ignorant. You have to enslave the mind along with enslaving the body. So one of the things you do is don't permit them to learn anything. Don't permit them to read. Don't forget to learn to. Don't forget let them associate with each other. Don't tell them anything positive about themselves. Don't give them any kind of a praise. Condemn them. Keep them as low. Well, that's what is going on in this country. But in the military, even though they didn't want black soldiers, there was always a manpower shortage. You know, when Columbus came here, he came in 3 ships, the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria. The Nina was piloted by a black man. 1492, in the area of the Mediterranean, Italy, and Spain, those places, the kind of racism that exists now didn't exist then, so there was no problem with having a black man piloting a ship. It was just normal course of events. When George Washington tried to raise the Continental Army, he had to go to the 13 colonies. Each colony had its own militia. So he had to go to each one of the colonies and try to get men get them to contribute men from their militia. It turns out that 1 out of every 6 soldiers in George Washington's army was a black man. 1 out of every 6. There were black soldiers at Valley Forge. When I was a kid in school reading through history books, not a single word I mentioned about black soldiers in the Army or Valley Forge or anyplace else. But today, when you go to Valley Forge, you see in the history section, you see that there were black soldiers at Valley Forge. If you continue at Route 23, just as you pass the entrance to Valley Forge, there's a monument there to the black patriots that were at Valley Forge. That monument was put there by a black sorority, Delta Sigma Theta. And every war this country's had, they didn't want black groups, they were forced to get them. During the War of 1812, there was regulation on the books against recruiting black soldiers for the Army. The War of 1812, regulations against recruiting black soldiers for the Army. That regulation stood until the British sailed up the Potomac River and burned down Washington, D.C., and they said, uh-oh, we need help. So they started taking black men into the military, the War of 1812. Comes the Civil War, and it's the same kind of story. Those who studied the Civil War know that General McClellan had a great deal. He was the leader of the Northern Army for a long period of time. But General McClellan, for some reason or other, didn't want to prosecute the war. He always had an excuse for not, chasing the rebels or whatever. Manpower shortage, materials, the ammunition, all kinds of excuses. Well, there were some facts that sort of backed him up. Enlistments were very short. Enlistments were only for 6 months. Casualties were extremely high. The bloodiest war they ever had. Guys standing point blank at each other, bang, bang, bang. Casualties were high. Desertions were extremely high. And the North was not winning. The North was not winning the war. But Congress and the President's cabinet and citizens, of course, were very, very upset and nervous because the war wasn't going very well. President Lincoln was also the head of the Army without the general staff and all that kind of stuff. And he shuffled generals around, and he kept after McClellan and fired him and brought him back and all kinds of stuff. He eventually got hold of Grant, and Grant did some work for us. But one of the things I say about the Revolution, the Civil War, is that you've probably never heard it put in place this way. But looking at the statistics and looking at what happened, you have us to agree, well, you might agree with me, that black soldiers saved the Union that became the United States. The North was not winning, as I said. President Lincoln realized that we were in dire straits. General Butler in the South saw that black people were leaving the plantations and hanging around his camps. And he sort of felt that, all these people are probably put them to work and use them. So he told Lincoln, listen, we can utilize the black people that are leaving their plantations and hanging around the camp. But Lincoln didn't want to do anything that would agitate the border states. Some states were free, some were slave, and then some were on the fence. So he didn't follow those urgings. General Fairmont out west issued a proclamation for emancipation, but Lincoln rescinded it. He rescinded it because, once again, he didn't want to offend the border states. But he eventually had to do something. So he waited until there was a minor victory in December of, I guess it was 61. And then in January the following month, he did issue the proclamation for emancipation. He had written and had it in his drawer for some time, debating about using it. So he did issue the proclamation. And with that proclamation, they started recruiting black soldiers for the Civil War. Now this article came from a large map that the National Geographic published maybe a year ago, maybe not even that long ago, I don't have the date. But on the center portion, the bottom of this map, there's a statement about freedom fighters. And it talks about, let's just go down to the guts of the thing. Some 200,000 African American men took up arms for the North. 200,000. Approximately, there were roughly 150,000 former slaves who had fled from their owners or had been liberated by Union forces. Possibly as many as 40,000 free blacks enlisted in the Army, and over 5,000 joined the Navy. They were involved in 205 battles. So this is my evidence for saying that black soldiers saved the Union that became the United States. Now, a lot of you are gray-haired like me. You recall when you were in school, they didn't talk about positive things about black people because that was a part of the, the white supremacy, black inferiority stuff. But the truth of the matter is that in his story, they don't tell you all of it. But whoever has the power of the pen and the press determines what goes in those books. But if you do a lot of extra reading and a lot of extra thinking, a lot of research, especially research from places other than America, you'll learn about these things that black folks were involved in. Comes in World War, where are we now? Right after the Civil War, the government established 4 black military units: the 9th Cavalry, the 10th Cavalry, 24th Infantry, 25th Infantry. Yes. They became known as the Buffalo Soldiers. They were utilized to help win the West, help protect the settlers as they went west. They needed protection from the settlers as much as they needed protection to the settlers, because the settlers didn't cotton to black men riding around with horses and carrying guns and carrying on. But they helped settle the West. They were involved in the Philippines. They were also very much involved in Cuba. Cuba is of interest to me because I recall in one of my 5th or 6th grade history books a picture of Teddy Roosevelt and Washington's saber thrusted, Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. Well, they don't mention the Buffalo Soldiers that were there. They don't tell you that the 24th Infantry actually rescued Teddy and his Rough Riders. You know what happened in Dunkirk? The British were being driven out into the sea. Well, the same thing was happening to Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, and the black 24th Infantry rescued them from that catastrophe. But they don't tell you about that. The 24th also was a group that conquered the blockhouse at San Juan Hill. They don't tell you about that either. But that was a part of the program. Say nothing positive about black people and just ignore them. But they were there. During World War I, same kind of thing. Black men were used more or less, as Mr. Moore talked about, laborers, but black men were used as laborers during World War I. Clean up behind the horses and the mules, bury the dead, dig the trenches, dig the latrine, unload this, load that, and so forth. However, there was one unit, the 369th Infantry, known as the Harlem Hellfighters. They were linked to General Blackjack Pershing. Now, they called him Blackjack because Pershing commanded black troops. And he was anxious to hit all these troops that he had to deal with, and the French were short of troops on one part of the line. So General Pershing linked the 369th to French commanders. Now, France did not have slavery. France had colonies in Africa. France had the French Foreign Legion. France had no problem whatsoever utilizing black men as fighting soldiers. If you see, most often, if you see a black man in a World War I uniform, if he was a fighting man, he has a French helmet. You sometimes wonder, Americans with that helmet. Well, the French gave them their helmets, gave them their arms. And the 369th spent more time on the front line in the trenches than any other outfit during the war. The French government awarded the entire group the Croix de Guerre, which is the highest award that the French give. But American officers were saying, don't praise these guys, don't tell them we got to get them back home, and they're going to get too used to Mademoiselle over here, and they're going to be trouble. Don't praise them. Get them back home. But it was during World War I, and we get the first African American fighter pilot. Our good man over there. Maybe some of you saw a movie, Flyboys.
Yeah.
Okay, in the movie Flyboys, the Flyboys was about French pilots training for World War I. And in that movie Flyboys, there was a black pilot. Well, that guy's real name was Eugene Bullard. Eugene Bullard lived just outside of Columbus, Georgia. And he had the misfortune of learning that his grandfather was lynched. Now, when I talk to young kids in school today, I ask them what is lynching, and they don't know. Well, hey, I'm glad you don't know. But I'm sorry you don't know history, because hundreds and hundreds of black folks were lynched. Illegal mobs string them up on a tree, burn the body, cut off parts of the body for souvenirs and that kind of stuff. Well, young Bullard learned that this had happened to his grandfather. But Bullard's father told him that, son, don't despair. There's a country across the ocean called France, where they treat black men more or less the same as white men. So Bullard yearned to get away from this crazy stuff in the South and go to France. So he ran away from home. Well, there are a couple of reasons why he ran away from home. He ran away from home and headed east. He did a lot of work with gypsies and camps around, but he finally got to Newport News, Virginia, and he stole onto a German ship. And he got to England, and he worked as a boxer and worked on all kinds. But he finally did get to France, and Eugene Bullard became a fighter pilot for the French. World War I, 1917. But here in good old USA, all right, thank you. In good old USA, all they want black men to do is dig ditches. Now, when the American Expeditionary Force got to France, they gave this guy a hard time. He was doing great until the Americans came over. Okay, and then after World War I, people took up a great interest in aviation. And one of our heroines is Bessie Coleman. This young lady wanted to fly in the worst kind of way. And but they wouldn't admit the blacks to flying schools. So Bessie Coleman, so highly desirous of learning to fly and being a pilot, Bessie Coleman went to France in 1921. She came back to this country a year and a half later and went around, encouraging blacks to get involved in aviation. She was giving airplane rides and demonstrations and that kind of thing. And we lost her when she was preparing for a demonstration in 1926 near Jacksonville, Florida. But there are a lot of black people that were very much desirous of flying. But after World War I in 1925, there was this concern about what to do with black soldiers, what to do with black folks and black soldiers and so forth. So the United States Army War College, Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, that's not far from here, is it? Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, United States Army War College, they did a study on the utilization of colored troops. And Appendix A is titled Analysis of Physical, Mental, Moral, and Psychological Qualities and Characteristics of the Negro. Well, there's a whole lot of stuff here. Charts and numbers and figures. Figures don't lie, but liars often figure. So parts of this I've just underlined some of the things that there's. Now, the Army War College is supposed to have the high, the intelligent men of the Army. These guys are going to be future generals and so forth, right? Okay, the Negroes low on the scale of human evolution. 1925, the year of my birth. Well, the cranial cavity of the Negro is smaller than the whites. The Negro brain weighs 32 ounces. The white brain weighs 45 ounces. One of the ways they determined the cranial cavity, Dr. Rush Benjamin Rush, there was a certain school of thought about the brain size and intelligence and all. They would take a skull and fill it with pepper seeds. And that's how they determined the volume of the skull and apply the brain that was in that skull. And they always found that somehow or other, when they weighed or counted the pepper seeds, they claimed black skulls had fewer pepper seeds. I don't know. But let's just go to the summary of this thing. Summarizing these characteristics, it appears that the Negro is profoundly superstitious. He is by nature subservient. He is by nature subservient. It is very susceptible to the influence of crowd psychology. We're always together. We get along great. We may not expect to draw leadership material from his race. It's an impossibility to place leaders of his race over whites. He has not the physical courage of the white. He simply cannot control himself in fear of some danger in the degree that the white man can. His psychology is such that he willingly accepts hard labor. That's a lie. And for this reason, can well be employed in labor troops or either of the combatant branches. The Negro is unmoral. He simply does not see that certain things are wrong. The Negro's growing sense of importance will make him more and more of a problem, and racial troubles may be expected to increase. In summary, the Negro's physical, mental, moral, and other psychological characteristics have made it impossible for him to associate socially with any except the lowest class of whites. Exceptions to this are the Negro concubines. But the Negro is unmoral. Well, this was 1925, the United States Army War College, Carlisle Barracks. This is what we had, this was the background, this is what we had to fight against. A couple guys I need to tell you about. Let me go back to this. After the war, a lot of people wanted to fly airplanes, And there were a lot of, the same thing with black kids see the same sky, the same birds, and the same clouds as white kids do. They have the same dreams and the same notions. Well, some of the black pilots, there are 5 black pilots, that call themselves the Blackbirds. And they went around giving air shows. This is a highway bulletin board advertising a colored air circus. This was 1931. I saw one of these air circuses in Mansfield, Ohio, when I was about 5 or 6 years of age. And I got the bug that I wanted to be up there with the clouds and the birds, like hundreds of other black kids. Well, I'll tell you about a couple guys. There's a guy named Charles Alfred Anderson who lived in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And he had the flying bug, and this guy was insane. He must have had gasoline in his blood or something. He ran away from home because here there was an airplane someplace down around where he lived. And he tried to get into flying schools. They wouldn't accept blacks in flying schools. And he went even Drexel University. They had some kind of a flying program. He applied to Drexel. Now they wouldn't take him either. So Charles Alfred Anderson became, so frustrated and so desirous to fly that he borrowed money for an all-used airplane, and Charles Alfred Anderson taught himself to fly. And he was still flying at the age of 86. He became the chief instructor down at Tuskegee. He and a interesting thing. He had a job as a groundskeeper someplace on the main line, up and down Lancaster Avenue, somewhere at Devon or Bryn Mawr, somewhere out there. But at any rate, when the employer found out that he was using his money to fly airplanes, they fired him. How dare you be so uppity to take my money? Well, at any rate, a Dr. Forsyth in Atlantic City was also interested in aviation. He had heard that Anderson had a license and so forth, so he bought an airplane. He and Anderson just flew all around the place. They did a cross-country from Atlantic City out to California and back up to North Jersey. They made an emergency landing in Camden. Now, some of you might know about Airport Circle, what they used to call Airport Circle, Route 30, 131 going. Well, there was an airport there. I was living in Camden in 1942, and I used to walk about, 3 or 4 miles from my house on Pine Street down to this airport, because the Navy was conducting primary flying there. They were flying 2-wing steermen, yellow steermen. And I used to go down there and just to watch, be around the airplanes and watch and hope and pray that I'd get a chance to, to fly one of these airplanes. Well, Anderson, as I said before, became the chief instructor at Tuskegee. There was another young man I need to tell you about. Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr. Davis Jr., his father was a Buffalo soldier. And Davis perhaps heard his father talking about the Army's attitude about black soldiers and black officers. So Davis wants to be a pilot, so he figured, well, if I can get through West Point, there's no way they can say that I don't have the intelligence and the qualities to be a pilot. Davis was a real bright guy. He was, honors in his high school and had a year at Northwestern University. So he gets into West Point in 1932. And Davis is the only black cadet at West Point in the starting class of 1932. And they tried to force Davis to quit. Davis was ostracized. Benjamin Davis Jr. was ostracized at West Point. They wouldn't even, that meant that no one was allowed to associate with him socially. They wouldn't even assign him a roommate. Davis spent 4 years at West Point in a room with empty beds. The message every day was, we don't want you here, out of here. On Sunday mornings, Sunday morning breakfast at West Point, cadets can sort of loosen up a bit. A cadet can sit at any table in the mess hall. During the week they're in squads and they all have a place to march and their place to sit and all that kind of stuff. On Sunday, it's sort of like free time. You walk in and sit anywhere, if the upperclassman at that table gives permission. Davis would troop from table to table, requesting permission to be seated, permission denied. I don't know where Davis ate on Sunday morning breakfast, but they wouldn't give him a seat in the cadet mess hall. This kind of thing went on for 4 years. Even when they went out in the woods to bivouac, Davis had to be in a tent by himself. Interestingly enough, officers have to be gentlemen. They have to have savoir-faire and the graces and a lot of dance and that kind of thing. Well, they had dancing classes. Nobody could dance with Davis. Maybe he had a mop or a broom or something, I don't know. But he probably the only cadet that never stepped on a lady's toe when he was learning how to dance. That was one advantage to that. But when Davis's class graduated in 1936, there were 276 cadets in that class. Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr. was number 35 from the top. Out of 276 cadets, he's in the top 13% of that class in 1936. Incidentally, just to mark it, and not to characterize the person at all, General Westmoreland, Vietnam General Westmoreland, he was first captain of that class. Now, no idea how he felt about Davis, but they were following the dictates that came down, and, I'm just marking the class for you. Well, Davis's dream was to become a pilot in the Air Corps, the Army Air Corps. In those days, as you guys know, in those days, the Air Corps was a part of the Army Air Corps. Well, Davis's dream was to become a pilot in the Army Air Corps. Well, dream denied, you go to the infantry. Why? Well, there's no black squadron. If you're going to be a pilot, you're going to be an officer. You're going to outrank some white guys. They're going to have to salute you and call you sir. And you're going to want to go to the officers' club, and you want to be treated like a gentleman. And oh heavens, no, not in 1936. You won't. Out. But during the 30s, as you know, this guy Adolf Hitler was doing this thing over in Europe, and the United States realized that looks real dry over there. We're going to have to do something about building up an army. And a lot of you know that during the 30s there was a thing called the Depression. And people were not spending money flying airplanes. All you could do to get money to keep bread on the table and keep some coal in the stove. And kids today don't know what coal in the stove is. No idea what coal is. That's progress for us. But at any rate, the government needed pilots. So they will say, well, we'll start civilian pilot training programs in colleges all around the country. And the notion is to let a lot of these guys get their pilot's license, and here's a pool of guys we could perhaps tip into for a military pilot. But there made no provisions for the black guys who wanted to be pilots. I mean, after all, once again, the black guys have the same dreams and aspirations as anybody else. But so the civil rights organizations, the NAACP, the black press, and people yelling and screaming at the government, and two guys, Chauncey Spencer and Dale White, they flew around the country trying to drum up support. They fly down to Washington, D.C., and then the junior senator, Harry Truman, and Everett Dirksen. Senator Truman said, well, you guys flew that thing all the way down here. I don't see why you can't fly for the Air Corps. I'll do whatever I can to, help you get into the Air Corps. Well, in the late 30s, President Roosevelt's running for his third term, and his opponent is Wendell Willkie. And whenever Wendell Willkie, he was a good politician, whenever he would go to the black community or any place else, he told people what they wanted to hear. That's the way politicians work. When he comes to you, he tells you what you want to hear, tell you what you want to hear, tell you whatever you want to hear, he'll tell you. Well, Willkie said, if I'm president, I'll see to it that black guys get in the Air Corps and fly and all that kind of stuff. Well, Roosevelt has to counter this. So he signed legislation for six black colleges would have civilian pilot training programs. And the first one was, take a bow, down with West Virginia State. And he was that's his alma mater. Okay. West Virginia State is Henry's alma mater. Then there was Howard, Hampton, Delaware State, North Carolina, AT&T, and Tuskegee. And there's also a flying school out west. The black lady and her husband had a flying school out west, out in Chicago. And well, I don't have it up here. But interesting, I was looking at an article, researching all this kinds of stuff. And there's an article in Time magazine, 1939. And it said, they're going to let black men learn to fly in a coffee-colored negress. Now, this lady, Willow Brown, was a very light-skinned lady, and she and her husband had a flying school. She was the flight instructor, he was a mechanic and engineer. And Time magazine just interested, a coffee-colored negress, which is interesting, the kind of language they used. But at any rate, Tuskegee gets one of these programs. But they wanted a more advanced program than what they had, so they tried to borrow money from the Army. And the Army wouldn't lend them the money, not in the least, so they went to the Julius Rosenwald Fund. And Julius Rosenwald was a rich guy who, funded, social uplift organizations. And it just so happens that a wonderful lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, the president's wife, this is Eleanor Roosevelt, she was on the board of the Julius Rosenwald Fund. And she had reasons to go be at Tuskegee. There were several. One being that they were looking at the polio program at Tuskegee. Her husband had polio. There was a veterans hospital at Tuskegee, and they had a polio treatment program. Well, Mrs. Roosevelt went to Tuskegee, and she said, listen, they told me black men couldn't fly, but I see you guys are flying around here, and I want to fly with one of you. So Mrs. Roosevelt flies with one of the pilots. The pilot that she flew with was Charles Alfred Anderson, the guy that had taught himself to fly back in the 20s. It's now 1941. And Mrs. Roosevelt, in June of 41, goes up with Charles Alfred Anderson, and he flies her around the field for about 45 minutes. And we think she had a lot to do with Tuskegee getting a contract with the Army to be the place where black men would go for their primary flight training. And maybe you saw the movie Tuskegee Airmen, Lawrence Fishburne, Cuba Gooding, and those guys. Well, Hollywood took some, as they always do, they took some liberties with history. And they had her out of time and out of place. But at any rate, Mrs. Roosevelt flew with the chief instructor, Charles Alfred Anderson. She did not fly with a recent graduate, as that movie showed us. But we think she had a lot to do with Tuskegee getting the contract, and they started flight training for the Army in summer of 1941. Now, the flying program at Tuskegee, all the flying program in the Air Corps all over, took 40 weeks. There are 4 schools, pre-flight, primary, basic, advanced. Each one of those schools is 10 weeks long. And it took 40 weeks to get through the flight program. So, let me go back a minute. A young man named Yancey Williams got his certificate from Howard University. And he applied to the Air Corps for admission. And 3 times he applied. 3 times he was refused. So he got with the NAACP, and they sued the Army for black men to get into the Air Corps. And with that lawsuit, they said, okay, we'll have a squadron. Squadron 99 will be for black pilots. But the Army guys considered it to be an experiment. Yes? The Army guys considered it to be an experiment. An experiment to prove to you that black men cannot be military pilots. This is an experiment to prove that you cannot be military pilots. The notion is we'll have small classes. We don't want to waste time or money. Maybe 10 to a class or something. They'll mess it up, fail, we'll sweep it aside. Forget about it. Well, the first class started off with 13 guys. After the end of 40 weeks, those 4 schools, 40 weeks, and there were 5 graduates. Out of the 13, there were 5 graduates. And among the first 5 graduates was Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr., the West Point guy. He's one of the first 5 graduates in March of 1942. When that class graduated, he was one. By now, he's a captain. He finished West Point in 36 as a lieutenant. 42, he's a captain. They put him in charge. He's sort of the leader of the group. Now, every 5 weeks, they would start a new class. So in the end, every 5 weeks, there's a graduation. So the second class graduates, 3 guys. The next class graduates, 4 guys. The class after that graduated 14. The next class graduates 14. So now we have the 26. Now we have the 26 guys needed to fill up a squadron. So Squadron 99 has the first full complement. So now they've graduated. They start flying P-40. The P-40 is the first class military aircraft. They're learning to do dive bombing and, strafing, air-to-air gunnery, air-to-ground gunnery, tight formation flying, combat tactics, and all that stuff. Now, every 5 weeks, another class is graduating. So by late summer of 1942, these guys are ready to go into combat. Thank you. By summer of 42, these guys are now ready to go into combat. So now here's where I have a lot of fun with later. Here's where I have fun with the guys, with the kids in school. The question to the kids, I won't ask you. The question to the kids in school is, when did we get into World War II? And you'd be amazed. I'm out in the suburbs, bright kids, small classes, and I can't get the right answers. So we finally somehow drag it out of that, December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. So we get into World War II in 1941. But here, late summer 1942, we have a squadron of black fighter pilots who are ready to go into combat, who want to go into combat. Highly patriotic, highly skilled pilots want to go into combat for a couple of reasons. We always had to fight 2 wars. We had to fight racism at home, and we had to fight, the Nazis over in Europe. So our guys are anxious to show that they can take care and compete in those 2 wars. And they're anxious to go into combat. No commander in Europe will take a black squadron. Summer of 1942, we're at war, desperately in need of all kinds of stuff. We don't want any black pilots, though. No, no, no. It took another 8 months. It wasn't until May of 1943 before the black squadron got an assignment to go to Europe to fly in combat. They were sent to North Africa. They were attached to the 33rd Group. 3 squadrons make up a group, and that group is generally headed by a colonel. So Colonel Ohlmeyer was in charge of the 33rd Group. The 99th Squadron got sent to him. He didn't want any parts of them, so he built them on the far side of the field. Ignored them part of the time, gave them lousy assignments, but evaluated them on the basis of, as if they'd been in regular combat and all that kind of stuff. So he sends his reports up the line, and the generals up the line agree with him that these guys are lousy pilots, and at one point they're going to say, send them all back home. But General Eisenhower, you all know he was the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces. At that particular time, he headed the Mediterranean theater. He reviewed all the studies of P-40 squadrons, and he said that the 99th was doing just as good as the other squadrons, so they stayed. And they had Colonel Davis go back to the States and train 3 additional squadrons. Squadron 100, Squadron 301, and Squadron 302. Those 3 squadrons were known as the 332nd Fighter Group. And Mr. Luther Smith was a member Mr. Luther Smith was a member of the Mr. Luther Smith was a member of the 332nd Group. And I'll let him tell you about how things went with the 332nd Group. Now keep in mind now that the 99th Squadron went over to the Mediterranean in like May of 43. And the 332nd Group with Luther Smith's Squadron came over later.
Dr. Richardson has given you a good review of what it was like to be a black man in military aviation 60-some years ago, when America felt strongly that it had to have a component of its global war effort called military aviation, complemented with the best people that they could find. The reason being, when World War II began in 1939, in Europe, Germany overran most of the eastern part of Europe. And they did it with a new component of military forces called air power. Air power was not new, but had never been used in warfare to the level it was in the beginning of World War II. Germany stated their airmen, the Luftwaffe, the German Luftwaffe, comprised the best people the Germans had in their nation. And they had the Stuka dive bombers, the Heinkel bombers, and the other aircraft that were new to the world. And a new term was formed called Blitzkrieg, lightning war. And that's how they actually overpowered most of Eastern Europe. And they made it clear that they intended to accomplish their objectives, not only with ground power, but with air power, and what complements they could use with sea power to become a major force in world power. The British understood it, the Americans understood it, and realized that if we were going to survive, we would have to be able to counter that force that Germany had developed in World War II. And so the British succeeded in saving Britain with the Royal Air Force, with the best young people they could bring together to save the British Isles in the years of 1940 and early part of 1941. And that's history. America knew that if we were going to be a significant part of World War II, we would have to do the same thing. And those of you who are my age and about my age remember, there are posters all over the United States, post offices, federal buildings, government buildings, Uncle Sam saying, we want you in our Air Force, in our Army Air Corps. We want the best we can have. Young men between ages of 20 and 26 were eager to form this new power called Air Power of America. Many young men, black and white. When the black men applied for applications to be part of the military operations, they were told, we do not want you, you're not the best. The presumption was these were recent descendants of slaves, Dr. Richardson had mentioned earlier. You did not represent the best of what America should have to be a major force with air power. So young black men were denied an opportunity to serve as military airmen and as military aviators at the beginning, or just before World War II began. And as Dr. Richardson mentioned, a young man named Yancey Williams, supported by the National Association of Advance for the Colored People, filed a lawsuit to enjoin the military to permit young black men to have an opportunity to be a part of our military aviation operations and forces. And we were, and Dr. Richardson told about the beginning. I was fortunate enough to be one of those that was accepted in 1942 for aviation cadet training, received my wings in May of 1943, and as Dr. Richardson said, I was assigned to the Squadron 302nd Fighter Squadron, trained at Suffolk Field in Michigan. We went overseas to Europe in January of 1944. We were assigned a rather innocuous task of flying patrol over Naples, Italy harbor, and the sea lanes between Naples, Italy, and Anzio, just south and east of Rome, Italy. And that was our duties. I never saw an enemy aircraft in the sky. I think we only attacked one enemy aircraft for 4 months, from February of 1944 until May of 1944. That airplane outflew us, got away. As only encounter a whole group had with an enemy aircraft. But what happened in April of 1944, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who commanded the 332nd Fighter Group that Dr. Richardson mentioned, after having commanded 99 Fighter Squadron in 1943, came back and took the 332nd Fighter Group overseas to Italy. He was a West Point graduate, and as Dr. Richardson said, the 4 years he spent at West Point, 1932 to 1936, he was never spoken to at any time in those 4 years by anybody, a classmate, an upperclassman, or anybody else, to discourage him to quit being a cadet at West Point. But all that did was strengthen his resolve, his determination, and his eagerness to be a military man. When he graduated West Point, he wanted to get in the Air Force, the Air Corps at that time. He was denied in 1939, but he was in the first class, as Dr. Richardson said, 1941. He was a captain. He was immediately given the rank of a lieutenant colonel and was made a squadron leader, commanding the 99 Fighter Squadron. The commanding officer of the 15th Strategic Air Force in Italy was a man by the name of Nathan Twining, who was a World War I veteran, a graduate of West Point, who knew and heard about Benjamin Davis's experience at West Point. And he felt a man that could go through that kind of experience and still have military bearing, and still become a United States military officer, and still be able to command a fighter squadron and then a fighter group. He must have the capability of providing the kind of support that General Twining needed and wanted in his 15th Air Force. The 15th Air Force was stationed in Foggia, Italy, which is the central part of Italy on the Adriatic side of the sea. It was a strategic Air Force supporting the strategic efforts of the 8th Air Force stationed in England. Their objective, those two air forces, were to reduce Germany's ability to wage war. That was their strategic objective. Twining said to Davis a black man, Twining a white man. Twining said, in the 15th Air Force, we need capable escort pilots to escort our bombers to reduce Germany's ability to wage war. And he said, you feel your boys can handle this kind of assignment? Now Davis took a little bit affront to his pilots being called bullies, but he said, yes sir, we can do that. And for the first time in the history of the United States, a black organization was called upon to be a part of an effort, a major effort, without reference to their color or the fact that they were different in any way. The general had confidence in Davis. He needed skilled pilots to escort bombers to make sure Germany's ability to wage war was reduced strategically. What he did was made sure that Davis was assigned to his Air Force, the 15th, and we were transferred from flying mediocre aircraft patrol duties to being escort pilots in the 15th Air Force, escorting B-24s and B-17 bombers to targets all over Europe from June of 1944 until May, when the war ended in Europe in 1945. Davis said to his group, he said, this is a new experience. He said, we're part of a team. The first time I'd heard that expression, I didn't really pay that much attention to what he was saying. But he said, our job is to see how many aircraft we can shoot down. Our job is to escort strategic bombers to targets throughout Europe to make sure that the bombers get to their targets and safely return, and do this continuously, when Germany's ability to wage war has been reduced, and the ground forces can take over and win the war. And he said, this is so important. Let me make it clear to you. Any pilot that disobeys this command to make sure you stay and protect the bombers, don't go out to see how many airplanes you can shoot down, protect the bombers to make sure they get to their strategic targets and return safely. He said, if you disobey this order, you will be court-martialed. That was the only way he could make it clear that there was no alternative to this command. And I'll cut my statement short by saying, from June of 1944 until May of 1945, when World War II ended, the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen, escorted heavy bombers of the 15th Air Force to targets throughout all of Europe 200 times without the loss of a single bomber to enemy aircraft. A record. That accomplishment was so unique.
I was there.
Two things took place. One, the German aircraft attacking the bombers in defense of their country realized very quickly the bombers being protected by these black pilots who were instructed stay with the bombers, make sure they get to their targets, and return. They knew if they got in too close, they would be taken out. Our aircraft were superior at that time to the German aircraft. Fortunately, we had in our squadron, at that point in time, not 3 squadrons in our group, not 3 squadrons, but 4. We could put a perimeter of aircraft protecting the bombers to the point the Germans could not successfully attack the bombers. So they chose other targets to attack. I can vividly remember many times seeing the German aircraft flying above and beyond and going someplace else. I thought they were just simply seeking other targets. But they were looking for targets that were much easier to attack without being shot down themselves. And so it became a practice. The Germans would not attack bombers being protected by the Tuskegee Airmen. The other side of the component was the bomber crew themselves began quickly to realize when they were being protected by this black fighter group, their bombers were not being attacked, They were getting safely to their targets, carrying out their mission successfully, and their lives were being saved. It was becoming a reality to them. These black pilots were as good as people that they had ever seen or ever were associated with. And they made it clear to those people that they were responsible for. And they made it clear to the President of the United States. At that time was Harry Truman. So when World War II ended, Harry Truman was running for re-election in 1948. And he took it upon himself to pass an executive order that stated segregation in military forces would end. There was no basis for it, economically, militarily, or even morally. And that was the beginning of what we now know as an integrated society today. There are many other things that have taken place as a result of what we did in combat in the skies over Europe in World War II. But the most significant took place just a month ago, a little over 6 weeks ago, when the Congress of the United States of America conferred upon the Tuskegee Airmen who participated in warfare 1941 to 1949, the United States Congressional Gold Medal for their experience of segregation, discrimination, and denial and rejection, and still played a major part in this country's efforts in World War II, 60-some years ago. The Congress of the United States said, "We know America has applauded you, respected what you did, and appreciate the efforts you made for this country in World War II, and the impact of your efforts has had on this nation since." And the President of the United States said, "I salute you as your commander and the President of the United States." It was a gesture that said, we all see differently. We see people for what you do and what you can do, and not by the way you look. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Luther. Luther Smith uses canes because on his 133rd mission, white pilots went home after 50 missions. On his 133rd mission, his plane went down. He was flying low, shooting up stuff on the ground. There was an explosion that damaged his airplane. He bailed out, luckily, and he survived, but he broke his hip and was taken prisoner and so forth. So that's why he walks with a cane. 33 of our guys were taken prisoner, but I want to introduce the quiet man in our group, John Harrison. John Harrison is a command pilot with over 10,000 hours of flight time.
What can I say, dear friends? These gentlemen have told you so much about Tuskegee Airmen. I will take approximately 8 minutes just to tell you. Now, you've been here a long time, and I know when you reach my age and some of my fellow veterans' ages here, the seat gets a little hard. So I'm just going to tell you a few things. I will tell you about how a Tuskegee Airman became a Tuskegee Airman. I grew up in Nebraska as a kid, an aircraft, to get a dog-eared page from a magazine that had a picture of the first black pilots. So I said, I'm going to be a pilot. And he said, we don't train you people as a pilot. We don't train you as pilots. And I said, oh, yes, you do. And I said, yes, sir. And here it is. These are the first pilots that were trained, black pilots. And so he said, give me that. And there was a door that said captain. And he goes into the office, in there for a few minutes, came out. The captain's with him. The captain looked at me, and he didn't call me boy. He said, Mr. Harrison, you really want to be a pilot? I said, yes, sir, just like you. Well, he wasn't a pilot, but I was sort of buttering up. To make a long story short, one of the things that they were doing to try to, I guess, control or, training us as pilots, was an experimental program. They call it the Tuskegee Experiment. Okay, and we know that the intelligence test and I guess the physical were two barriers that a lot of us had to overcome. Well, I was taking some courses in the morning at Omaha University, and it was basic principles of aerodynamics, and they reviewed all the math. So when I took the intelligence test, had a lot of math in it, I aced the intelligence test. And being this kid out in Nebraska, getting up at 4 o'clock, herding my uncle's cows and all that, I was in perfect physical condition. So the intelligence test and the physical, I passed. That was in July of 1942. 6 months later, I got a letter, that was in December of 42, to report to Tuskegee to train as a pilot. I left Omaha in, I think it was in the latter part of February, to go to Tuskegee, Alabama. I had a little camel hair coat that I had, somebody had given me, and a tennis racket. Got on the train in Omaha, and the train stopped in St. Louis. The conductor walked down the coach. There were people there, and he stopped by me and said, "You, get off." And I said, "No, sir, I'm going to Tuskegee." He probably never heard of Tuskegee, but I said, "Get off." So I got off. I'm standing on the ramp. Now, I didn't know that St. Louis was the Mason and Dixon line. And all the black folk had to ride in this car behind the engine, steam engine, where all the soot and smoke and everything came in. And the white folks could ride, in the other cars. So I get in the black coach and I go to Tuskegee. But what was said by Luther, the highest honor that this country of ours can give is the Congressional Medal of Honor, which we received. George Washington was the first recipient, and I think we were the 136th or 135th, whatever. And it was a great honor. And I think of that sergeant telling me that we don't train you people. I spent 23 years in the Air Force. I've flown all around the world. I've crossed the Pacific Ocean at least 30 times, the North Atlantic as a MATS pilot. I've flown 14 different types of aircraft, and I have the highest pilot rating in the Air Force, a command pilot. I wish I could go back and find that sergeant.
Oh, thanks, John. They've been really great. Are there any questions? Yes, 51.
That's a pretty good question. So let me just say this. P-51 Mustang is now rated the finest military fighter plane ever manufactured anywhere at any time. I had an opportunity to fly that airplane in combat, actually flew 40 missions in it. it was so good as a fighter plane, we would give the Germans 10 seconds to bail out. We'd turn on our gun cameras, turn the gun and camera switch off, turn on the gun camera, take a picture of the German pilot jettisoning his canopy before he bailed out, take a picture of him bailing out of his airplane in claim of victory. Now, that's not a joke, that's not something that was taken lightly. It was part of what we did in return for the kind of expectation we wanted the Germans to give our bomber crews. Because the German aircraft, their Focke-Wulf 190s, their Messerschmitt 109s, had 30 millimeter cannons on board their aircraft. We had 50 millimeter machine guns. Their cannons had explosive missiles. When they exploded into the fuselages of these bombers that had 10 men on board, men were killed and men were injured. Many times when bomber pilots had disabled airplanes with men on board injured, they would not leave the airplane. They couldn't fly them back to safety. They would have to, quite gladly, escort them to bases, make sure that they got on the ground and become prisoners. They would get an airplane and they would get the prisoners. But they were saving lives. So we were simply returning that kind of human behavior to the Germans when we let them go. We claimed victory. We didn't have to shoot an airplane down and took a picture. But let me just say this, that when I first became a fighter pilot, we were flying the mediocre type of fighter craft in the Air Force inventory. That time it was the P-39 Air Cobra, the airplane I was flying in combat. As I said earlier, I never saw an enemy aircraft while I was flying an airplane. When General Twining brought us into the 15th Air Force, he assigned us to P-47 Thunderbolts, which is an upgraded fighter aircraft, big, sturdy, fast. It was the best because it didn't have the range that the P-51 Mustang had. And then, within a month, we transitioned from the P-47 Thunderbolt to the P-51 Mustang. And when we started flying the Mustang, we knew that we were on the first team. We knew we were doing something that meant everything to the United States. We were proud of what we were doing. We were segregated racially. We were part of an effort that brought about the successful ending of World War II with a superior aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. Thank you.
A lot of times, thank you. There were just a few points before we, you've been wonderful. There are, let's see, 992 black guys got their wings from the advanced flying school at Tuskegee. 992, almost 1,000. 450 of our guys flew combat in Europe. We lost 66 guys over there to all causes. Getting shot down, accidents, running into mountains, running into all kinds of things. We lost 66. But our guys shot down 111 German aircraft in aerial combat. Our guys even sank a destroyer. No other fighter group got credit for sinking a destroyer. When our guys came back and said, hey, we sank a destroyer, and the headquarters, no, you know, machine gun, big, come on. Well, it just so happens that on the wing of a fighter plane, leading into the wing is a camera, a gun camera. When you fire the gun, the camera takes a picture, whatever's out there. So they developed our film, and lo and behold, second pass that one of the guys made, the ship exploded, blew up, and so we got credit for sinking a destroyer. Many times people ask about the red, you know, the guys didn't know there were black pilots in these airplanes. You have an oxygen mask here, you have goggles up here, you can't see what a guy is. And then he's zipping past you, you know, all they knew was those red tail airplanes with the red tails. Later they found out that the pilots were black. But they learned that when they were under escort, those planes, the red tails, they got the best possible escort. So the bomber guys started calling them red tail angels. Red tail angels in the air, on the ground, that's something else. Well, things got a strange way of happening. When they asked the guys to escort bombers, they got rid of the 0439s, gave them P-47s. But we always got hand-me-down airplanes. So they get these P-47s that had been flown. They took the best from 4 or 5 different squadrons. Each squadron paints its airplanes up in a different way. So the guys get these airplanes, you got checker tails, and you got candy stripes, and you got top hat, all kinds of stuff painted on these airplanes. Now how is this going to be a group with all this, so they just took red paint to cover up what was on there? Not thinking about a logo, well, let's just at least look alike, so take this stuff out. But that became the logo. The red on the tail became the logo. And then later they made it much bigger, and even after the guys finally got some new airplanes, they painted the tails a brilliant red. They made it much, much bigger. So our guys became known as the Red Tails. Not knowing that there were black men flying these planes. There's a guy named Connolly, James Connolly, who was a bombardier on a B-24. His B-24 was shot up. They were coming back from Pulaski or someplace over there. His B-24 was all shot up, a couple engines. You know the old war stories. The engines are out the plane, the smoke, we're losing altitude. Well, that was happening to them. They get across the Adriatic and they see this airfield. It's not even on the map. So they land there and they get out, and jeeps of black guys come up and they're speaking English. Yeah, must be there. But they didn't know anything about black pilots. They look around, they see all these red tail airplanes around. And Frank said that's how they found out that the red tails were flown by black men. The best kept secret in the war. So much of a secret, it's a great effort to keep it a secret. A lot of you may have heard of a guy by the name of Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks was a famous artist, a painter, a composer, a musician, and he did all kinds of, guy was a genius. But he was the information officer for the 332nd group when they were in training in Suffolk Field, Michigan. When it came time for the guys to go overseas, they wouldn't give our information officer clearance to go overseas. So Gordon Parks, he'd ask the colonel, well, I don't have to check headquarters. Headquarters won't approve it. He goes to D.C. and he finds out that there were senators that did not want black pilots to get publicity, so they wouldn't let the information officer go overseas with them. Gordon Parks, in his book, Half Past Autumn, he did about 3 or 4 pages dedicated to his experience with Tuskegee Airmen at Selfridge Field. Any other questions? Yes.
How many missions to Pulaski did you?
Me? None. I was in class 45A. My class was graduated in March of 45. Went home on leave, went to combat training in April, and when he heard I was coming over, he surrendered. And the war ended in May, and I didn't get into over Pulaski. Luther, how many over Pulaski? How many?
12 times.
He was over Pulaski 12 times. Above the bombers. The bombers are down here, our guys get up above them. You had a question? Yes.
Question for Luther. I'd like to, can you comment on your experience in the German POW camps?
That's a good question. I'll preface by saying this. I was a prisoner of war in Germany from Friday the 13th of October. The war ended in May of 1945. In October of 1944, Germany was losing the war. They were losing the war. The war wasn't over. The war didn't end until May of 1945. But when I became a prisoner, I thought surely the Germans were going to kill me. It was just my reaction of what they were going to do to me as a prisoner. When I became a prisoner, I was badly wounded. First thing they did was put me in a hospital, make sure my injuries were taken care of. Shortly thereafter, I was assigned to Stalag 18A, prisoner of war camp. And a Swiss representative from the National Red Cross came to visit me. And he said, I'm going to sign you a number. And I said, okay, what's the significance of the number? And he said, well, with this number, just to say to you would be the United States. I said, how can that be? I'm a prisoner of war in Germany. And he said, this number will not disappear. Germany will not let this number disappear. You will be accounted for. It meant very little to me as a prisoner of war, badly injured. But he said that. But he made it clear to me that although I was a prisoner of Germany, Germany was a nation that observed clearly and understood the Geneva Conventions, particularly the prisoner of war protocol, something we're having a little difficulty with now. But what Germany was concerned about was how they were going to be treated as a losing nation in a war. The only thing that Germany had that would have leverage in negotiations when the war was over with the Allies were the hundreds of thousands of Allied prisoners that they had. It was a valuable commodity that they had, and they intended to take care of it, because their salvation depended upon how they were going to be treated by the Allies when the war was over. And so I was treated as a VIP. Let me just give you a couple of examples. There were occasions when I was in a German hospital, and I was on occasion in wars. There were many Germans, and I was the only American prisoner of war. And when the German doctors would come into the ward, because I was an officer at that point in time, they would come to me and Sieg Heil me as the highest ranking person in the room. And they would carry on small talk with me because I was somebody that they respected and treated with dignity. That was the kind of treatment that I had as a prisoner. But it wasn't all good being a prisoner of war. I went down to 70 pounds when the war was over. There were times when I had only grass soup and water. I meant grass soup. I meant hot water and grass was a daily diet. Germany was a losing nation in a war. And when the Battle of Blois took place, December 16, 1944, I couldn't speak German, but I heard the ranting of Adolf Hitler on the radio. I was in a German hospital and they had radios. I didn't know what he was saying, but I watched the Germans paying through the war, and they heard that there was this American prisoner in this particular hospital in Austria. And they said, could they visit? And the Germans said yes. And they came to visit me. The first thing I asked, I said, what's all this I hear that's going on? I have no idea. I don't speak German. They said, well, haven't you heard? And they said, the big battle going on. I said, well, yeah, we're in a war. And they said, well, no, this is a particular serious battle. I said, well, where's the battle? They said, well, it's up in Belgium, but Germans have the Allies surrounded. This was the Battle of the Bulge. And I said, well, where's our Air Force? They said, well, the weather's bad. Air Force can't get off the ground. And Hitler was saying on the radio, this is our opportunity to perfect our secret weapon. I didn't know anything about their secret weapon. Their secret weapon were the V-1 and the V-2 rockets that they hoped, that Hitler hoped to perfect to bomb England and to turn the war around. This was in December 1944. That scared the living daylights out of me. I was a prisoner of war in Germany. I couldn't speak the language. I said, if the battle turns around, I thought the war was going to be over soon. I said, I had no idea what was going to happen to me. And so, I decided I would better learn the language, at least to even protect myself. So I learned German language in less than 3 weeks. Now that's not that much of a miracle. The German language and the English language have the same derivation. Many of the words are the same. Water in Germany is Wasser. Meat in Germany is Fleisch. Many words are very similar. And hearing German all the time, you pick the words up, and pretty soon you learn the language. But being a prisoner of war in Germany was not a very, very satisfactory situation. But it was one that I learned that people may be different, but people respect each other. And I think the thing we have to learn, this is not part of my speech, we have to learn to settle our differences without resorting to war. Thank you.
You know, a lot of people have asked how the Germans would treat us, but our prisoners in Germany, black prisoners in Germany, were treated better than black men in the United States. We had German prisoners of war on our base in Waldoboro, South Carolina. If those German prisoners were in town on a work detail, they could go into the restaurants or the stores or any place else. We could not. We could not. The PX was separated, white, black. The German prisoners went in on the white side, we went in on the black side, they got served before we did. Good old USA, with the racism, the stuff from slavery, and that kind of stuff. But in Germany, they respected position, they respected authority, and the fact that there were black people, that didn't matter so much to them. You were a pilot, you were an officer, you got to respect authority. In this country, many times, they refused to salute black officers, or wouldn't return the salutes of black officers. So those are some of the things that happened way back then. Today, you had a question. Yes, Miss.
I read not too long ago within the squadron now that wanted to use your name. Is that true? And did you give them the right?
Well, we can't get it. That belongs to the government. Yes, that's true. The 99th Squadron was disbanded after the war. The number was reactivated. It was a transport squadron. The 332nd group was deactivated, but there was a 332nd something reactivated over in Iran during Desert Storm. Those numbers belong to the government. I mean, we once had them, but we don't own them by any means. Yes, please, sir. Yes.
I read somewhere where some of your aircraft encountered a German jet.
Yes, yes. One of our guys shot down two of them in a mission to Berlin. Three. One guy got two, but there were three shot down in this mission to Berlin. ME-260. No, they dove down, came up underneath them.